A rusty, blood-soaked chain lay coiled on the grimy counter, a devil's halo in the buzzing fluorescent glare of the garage. The man attached to it, a mountain of leather and ink, his face a roadmap of scars and fury, wasn't asking for help. He was begging. His daughter was bleeding out on an operating table across town, and his bike, his only way to get to her, was dead. Every grease-stained mechanic in that shithole on Forge Avenue in Cleveland looked away, their backs a wall of cowardice and contempt. All except one. 22-year-old Maya Sanchez, the girl they called Taco Bell when they thought she couldn't hear, the only woman in a 10-block radius who could rebuild a transmission blindfolded, stepped forward. That single act of human decency cost her everything. Her job, her security, her last shred of hope. But what none of those bastards knew, what her pig of a boss couldn't possibly imagine, was that the tattooed devil bleeding on his floor wasn't just some biker trash. He was the brother of the man who owned the entire goddamn company. And from that moment on, everything was about to burn to the goddamn ground. Before we dive into this gutter and pull out the gold, tell me where you're watching from in the comments below. What city are you in? And hit that subscribe button right now because you're not going to want to miss the stories I'm bringing you tomorrow. You think this is intense? We're just getting started. It was another frozen piss morning on Forge Avenue in the industrial gut of Cleveland. The kind of morning where the air tasted like iron and despair, and the sky was the color of a day-old bruise. The symphony of the city was a relentless clang of machinery from the nearby steel mills, the groan of freight trains on rusted tracks, and the angry hiss of salt trucks spraying the icy streets. Inside Apex Automotive, the air was a thick cocktail of gasoline, burnt rubber, and the cheap, scorched coffee that was the only warmth to be found. Fluorescent lights hummed a weary tune over a graveyard of half-disassembled vehicles, and toolboxes plastered with faded, peeling stickers of pin-up girls. Laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed from a corner where a group of mechanics were gathered. But under the chassis of a wrecked Ford F-150, Maya Sanchez was already slick with sweat and grease, the cold of the concrete floor seeping into her bones. She had no time for their bullshit. She was here for one reason: to work until her hands bled if she had to. Maya was the youngest mechanic on the floor, the only woman, and she felt the weight of their judgment in every glance, every smirk, every deliberate exclusion. They didn't call her by her name. To them, she was Chica. "Hey, Chica, get me the 10 mil. Chica, you missed a spot under the fender. Chica, go clean the sludge trap. That's a girl's job, right?" She wore the name like a suit of armor forged in acid. It burned every time, but she never let them see her flinch. Her navy blue coveralls, 2 sizes too big, were stained a permanent dark gray over the knees and across the chest, the name Sanchez stitched in faded red thread over her heart. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe, tight braid, with loose, rebellious strands sticking to her temples, glued there by sweat and grime. She gritted her teeth, leveraging all her weight into a wrench that refused to budge. She wasn't just fixing a truck. She was fighting for her right to exist in a world that was determined to erase her. "Hey, Chica!" It was Marco, one of the older techs, his gut hanging over his belt, a cigarette dangling from his lips. He bellowed from across the garage floor. "You done dreaming under there? The boys and I are taking bets on whether you can actually get that bolt loose before your little arms snap." The others cackled, a chorus of hyenas. Another voice, slick with venom, added, "Leave her alone, Marco. She's probably praying to a saint to come down and do it for her." More laughter. Maya slid out from under the truck, her movements slow and deliberate. Her back ached, her knuckles were raw, and her palms were black. She didn't rise to the bait. She never did. Answering them would be a sign of weakness, an admission that their words found their mark. She walked silently to the main toolbox, grabbed a breaker bar, and returned to the truck without making eye contact. The men smirked, their victory declared in her silence. She slid back underneath the cold steel frame. Inside, a firestorm of rage and frustration was building, but on the outside, she was granite. It was the same goddamn story, day in and day out. Her manager, Frank Donovan, a man whose face seemed permanently twisted in a sneer, only ever saw her when she made a mistake. He never materialized when she finished a complex engine rebuild 2 hours ahead of schedule. He never offered a word of praise when a customer called back to compliment her work. But let her misread a pressure gauge by a single PSI. Let one screw be less than perfectly torqued, and his voice would slice across the garage like a razor. "Sanchez, you call this finished? My grandmother could do a better job with a butter knife." He'd yell it in front of everyone, making sure the humiliation was as much a part of her job as the grease under her nails. She learned to be a ghost, to move silently, to work relentlessly, to be invisible until the job was done. But that didn't mean she didn't feel it. It didn't mean she didn't lie awake at night, the sting of their words replaying in her mind, fueling a dream that felt more impossible with each passing day. Maya dreamed of her own garage. "Sanchez and Sons," the sign would read, painted in bold, proud letters. A clean shop. A place where skill mattered more than gender or skin color. A place where women like her could come and work and be judged only by the quality of their hands. But for now, this was her reality. Frostbitten mornings, endless double shifts, the constant, grinding disrespect. Her father was on disability after a fall at the mill, and her mother worked 2 cleaning jobs, her hands swollen and chapped. The stack of bills on their small kitchen table was a mountain that never shrank. Maya had no choice. She had to show up. She had to turn the wrench. She had to swallow the poison and pretend it was water. Her life, her family's life, depended on it. The garage operated around her in a haze of lazy masculinity. 2 mechanics were scrolling through their phones, laughing at some stupid video. Someone was arguing loudly about a football game from the weekend. The radio, crackling through a cheap speaker, blasted classic rock. The whole place moved like a rusted, dying machine, still turning but leaking oil and spewing fumes. And in the middle of it all, Maya created her own rhythm. Focused, precise, relentless. Every perfectly torqued bolt was a silent, "fuck you." Every purring engine she brought back to life was a testament to her belonging, a truth she knew in her bones even if they would never admit it. But she wasn't naive. In this place, belonging wasn't earned through skill. It was a birthright of the boys' club. And she was not, and never would be, a member. Another mechanic, a young guy named Kevin who should have known better, swaggered past her bay. "Working hard or hardly working, Chica?" he muttered, just loud enough for the others to hear and snicker. Maya didn't look up. She kept her eyes on the axle she was seating, listening for the solid, satisfying click that told her it was home. She set down her mallet, wiped her forehead with the back of a greasy sleeve, and exhaled a cloud of white into the frigid air. She wasn't just working. She was waging a war. Outside the garage doors, the city roared on. Taxis honked, trucks rumbled, and pedestrians hurried past, their heads bowed against the brutal wind. The weak winter sun struggled to pierce the grime on the windows, casting long, distorted shadows into the shop. The light barely touched Maya's bay, but it was enough to catch the defiant glint in her dark eyes. She had tuned out their jokes, their music, their existence. All she could hear was the voice in her own head, a steady, unyielding drumbeat. "Keep going. Don't let the bastards win. Keep pushing." The massive steel garage door groaned open, its screech barely audible over the scream of an impact wrench. but something about the way the frozen air blasted inside made every head in the place turn, just for a second, before quickly snapping away again. A man filled the doorway, his sheer size blocking the weak morning light. He was a beast wrapped in cracked, road-worn leather, his shoulders as wide as the truck Maya was working on. The fluorescent lights caught the patch on the back of his vest, a snarling wolf's head, encircled by the words, Iron Wraiths MC. That one detail was enough to suck the air out of the room. Idle conversations died. The laughter choked in the mechanics' throats. The few customers in the pathetic waiting area went rigid, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. This wasn't a customer. This was trouble-made flesh. His chest heaved, his breathing ragged and harsh. He stomped toward the front counter, his heavy boots echoing on the oil-stained concrete. There was a dark, wet stain spreading across the side of his leather jacket, and another on his thigh. Blood. Fresh blood. "Please," he rasped, his voice a raw, broken thing. He slammed a bloody gloved hand on the counter, leaving a smear. "I need help. My bike. It's dead. My little girl, she's at Metro Health. There was a crash, a goddamn semi. They said, internal bleeding. They're taking her into surgery right now." His words were a desperate, chaotic flood, each one cracked with a panic so raw it was terrifying. For a heartbeat, the garage was dead silent, the kind of silence that's louder and heavier than any noise. Then Kim, the receptionist, a woman who seemed to subsist on apathy and cheap perfume, leaned back in her chair. She didn't even look at the blood. She just tapped her long, acrylic nails on her desk, her gaze locked on her phone. "Fill out a form and take a seat," she said, her voice as flat and dead as the winter sky. "We'll get to you when we get to you." The biker shook his massive head, his eyes wild. He leaned further over the counter, his frame trembling. "You don't understand. I don't have time for a goddamn form. I just need a jump, a look, anything. I'll pay you triple. I'll pay you whatever you want. Please. My daughter's name is Lily." Kim didn't look up. "Everybody's got a story, pal," she snapped, her gum cracking like a tiny gunshot. Behind him, a man in a cheap suit, waiting for his oil change, grabbed his wife's arm and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "My God, what is that thing doing here? Let's go." In the corner, another customer, a young man, fumbled with his coffee, stood up and muttered, "Yeah, I'm not sticking around for this." He practically ran out the door, letting it swing shut behind him. The biker's gaze swept the room, catching the averted eyes, the subtle shifts away from him, the way the mechanics suddenly found urgent tasks to perform. He knew that look. He'd been on the receiving end of it his entire life. It was the look that judged the leather, the patch, the ink that crawled up his neck long before it ever registered the humanity in his eyes. He dragged a hand down his face, his fingers shaking, and let out a guttural sound somewhere between a sob and a curse. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She's only 8 years old. I can't miss this." That's when the laughter started. Marco, the old-timer, let out a barking laugh from across the floor. "Should have called a goddamn taxi, tough guy," he sneered. Another one chimed in. "Yeah, your scary biker costume don't let you cut the line here, buddy." The words were like stones, and the biker flinched, stepping back from the counter. His shoulders, which had seemed so broad and intimidating moments before, now slumped under the invisible weight of their collective scorn. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen, ready to give up, ready to accept that he had walked into a place with no mercy to spare. His jaw was clenched, his eyes burning, not with rage, but with a despair so profound it was almost tangible. He wasn't a monster looking for a fight. He was a father looking for a lifeline. And they were all watching him drown. Maya saw it all from under the truck. She had heard every word, felt the room's atmosphere curdle around him. She saw the raw terror in his eyes, the way his hand trembled as he held his phone. She recognized that look, the look of someone being judged, convicted, and sentenced before they'd even had a chance to speak. It was the same look she got at the hardware store, the same dismissal she felt every single day in this very garage. The look that told you that you were less. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, angry rhythm. The biker's head was bowed, the fight draining out of him. He muttered something so soft only she could have heard it. God, please. Not my little girl. The garage was already moving on, the mechanics picking up their tools, Kim calling out for the next customer, their collective indifference swallowing him whole, rendering him invisible. He was a ghost of a man, a statue of rejection. The message was brutally clear. You are not welcome here. Your pain does not matter here. He took a shuffling step toward the door, his body folding in on itself. People were whispering again. Thug, someone hissed. Probably his own damn fault. His jaw locked, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. He was about to walk out, to be pushed back into the cold by the force of their prejudice, when a voice cut through the noise, calm and clear as a bell. Hey, wait. Every head snapped in her direction. Maya was standing by her workbench, a dirty rag in one hand. Grease streaked her cheek and her coveralls were filthy, but she stood as if rooted to the spot, her spine straight. Her voice hadn't been loud, but it had sliced through their hateful indifference like a razor. The biker froze, his back to her, and slowly turned. His eyes, wary and uncertain, found hers. She took a step toward him. What kind of bike? She asked. The garage fell silent again, but this time it was a silence of pure shock. A ripple of disbelief, then scorn moved through the mechanics. Would you look at that? Marco barked, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. Chica thinks she's a superhero. Another voice joined in. She's gonna get herself hurt playing with the big boys. Someone should tell her. Kim rolled her eyes so hard it was a wonder they stayed in her head. Fucking unbelievable, she muttered. But Maya's eyes never left the bikers. The only thing that mattered was the question hanging in the air between them. Tell me, she said again, her voice steady. The biker blinked, stunned by the simple decency of the question. A Harley, he stammered, his voice hoarse. An old Road King. It won't turn over. I think the ignition's shot. It's right outside. Maya nodded once, already moving. She walked toward him and held out a half-empty bottle of water from her toolbox. You look like you've been through hell, she said. Drink this. He stared at the bottle, then at her, his expression a mixture of confusion and profound gratitude. He took it, his hand shaking so badly that water sloshed onto the floor. Thanks, he whispered. My kid. They said there isn't much time. Maya was already crouching by the door, peering out at the massive black motorcycle parked at the curb. Could just be a loose wire, she said, her mind already working. 5, 10 minutes maybe. I can take a look. 10 minutes? He breathed, a desperate flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. I'll take 10 minutes. Behind them, a voice dripped with malicious warning. You're making a big mistake, Sanchez. Don't say we didn't tell you so. The laughter that followed was cold and sharp. Maya didn't even look back. She didn't acknowledge them. She reached into her personal toolbox, grabbed a multimeter and a few essential tools, and walked toward the door without asking for permission, without waiting for approval. Her heart was a jackhammer in her chest, but her hands were rock steady. She wasn't helping him out of pity. She was helping him because she knew exactly what it felt like to be screaming on the inside, while the world pretended you were silent. The biker followed her, his eyes still darting around the garage, as if expecting someone to tackle him, to throw him out. But Maya was already on her knees in the slush and road salt next to the Harley, her fingers expertly prying open a side panel, her focus absolute. It was as if the hostile world of the garage behind her had ceased to exist. For the first time since he had burst through that door, the man felt a sliver of hope. He felt seen. The voices behind her rose, no longer just mocking but laced with genuine threat. Marco, the old-timer who'd been at Apex since before she was born, stepped forward, his face dark. "Sanchez, I'm telling you for your own good. Get away from that bike. You don't get involved with clubs like the Iron Wraiths. There are rules in this world, and you don't touch a customer's vehicle without a work order signed by Donovan." He crossed his beefy arms, trying to use his years of authority to crush her. Another mechanic chimed in, his voice nervous. "He's right, Maya. Don't be a damn fool. These guys are nothing but trouble. You help him, and his problems become your problems. Walk away now." What do you think? Should she walk away? Is it ever worth risking your entire livelihood for a complete stranger? Let me know what you would do in this situation in the comments. I read every single one. Maya didn't look back. Her hands were a blur, tracing wires, testing connections, every part of her locked onto the machine. She heard their warnings, but the frantic ticking of the clock in her own head was louder. "You're gonna get canned, Chica," another voice sneered. "Donovan finds out you went off book for this piece of trash. You're done. We warned you." The laughter that followed was shaky. Underneath their bluster, they were afraid. Afraid of the patch. Afraid of the reputation. Afraid of the violence that name represented outside the safe, greasy walls of the garage. The biker stood a few feet behind her, a statue of conflict. He wanted to tell her to stop, to save herself from the trouble he had brought to her door. He knew what that patch did to people. He knew the doors it slammed shut, the venom it drew. He didn't want her to take a bullet that was meant for him. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice a low rumble of anguish. She didn't even look up from the engine block. "I do," she answered, her voice even and calm. She found a frayed wire, her fingers moving with practiced ease. "My father taught me that you don't stand by and watch a man bleed. You don't ask for permission to be a decent human being." The words hung in the frigid air, silencing the shop for a long, pregnant moment. Marco scoffed, shaking his head in disgust. "Being decent don't pay the rent, kid. This isn't church. This is a business. You follow the rules or you get the hell out." Maya finally paused, straightening up just enough to meet his eyes over her shoulder. Her expression was a mask of cold resolve. "I'm not here to play by your rules. His daughter is in surgery. That's the only rule that matters right now." The biker's throat went tight. He had come here expecting to be spit on, to be thrown out. Instead, this young woman, half his size and with everything to lose, was standing her ground for him without a moment's hesitation. The other mechanics just shuffled their feet, muttering to each other, glancing nervously toward Donovan's office at the end of the hall. No one else dared to help, but no one dared to physically stop her either. They had thrown their warnings, their threats, their fear at her, and she hadn't even flinched. She crouched down again, her fingers working with incredible speed. The biker whispered, almost to himself, "Why are you doing this?" Maya didn't pause. "Because standing there and doing nothing is a choice. It's the worst choice of all. Because I couldn't look myself in the mirror tonight if I let you walk away without even trying." She found the break in the wire, stripped it with her teeth, and twisted the ends together. A small spark jumped. The engine coughed once, a weak, promising sound. Her lips pressed together in concentration. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was for every time she'd been told to stay in her place. Every time her worth had been dismissed. Every rule that had been used to keep her down. Behind her, the warnings hadn't stopped. Donovan's gonna tear her apart. Kids throwing her life away for some lowlife. But Maya's hands kept moving, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. She wasn't doing this for praise or approval. She was doing it because her conscience wasn't a matter of convenience. She had been taught that when someone falls, you offer a hand. When someone is in pain, you listen. And when someone is begging for their child's life, you damn well try. No job, no rule book, no fear of some asshole manager was strong enough to break that code. The biker swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. You're risking everything. Maya's eyes met his, dark and unwavering. Some things are worth risking everything for. And then she hit the ignition. The engine sputtered, caught, and then roared to life, a deep, thunderous V-twin heartbeat that shook the entire garage. The muttering behind her died instantly. The judgment in their eyes didn't disappear, but it was now mixed with a grudging, shocked respect. She had crossed a line, and she knew with terrifying certainty there was no going back. She stood up, wiped her greasy hands on the back of her coveralls, and spoke without looking at any of them. You can all call it stupid. I call it being human. The air went thick and heavy a split second before the door to the back office flew open and slammed against the wall. The sound was like a gunshot, and it was followed by a voice that dripped with pure, undiluted venom. What in the ever-loving hell is going on out here? Frank Donovan stormed onto the garage floor, his face a blotchy, furious red. He was a man whose small authority was his entire world, and the roar of that unsanctioned engine was a personal declaration of war. He shoved past a mechanic, his eyes zeroed in on Maya standing next to the thrumming Harley. Sanchez! He spat her name like it was poison. What the hell do you think you're doing? Every sound in the garage ceased. Every wrench was stilled. Every conversation died. It was the dead, charged silence that precedes an explosion. Maya stood her ground, rag still clutched in her hand. Her jaw was tight, but her eyes were steady. Her heart was a trapped bird beating against her ribs, but her voice didn't waver. I'm helping him, sir. His bike wouldn't start. Donovan let out a bark of a laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. Helping him? You don't touch a goddamn thing in my shop without a work order. You know the procedure. You know the chain of command. Who the hell authorized this? He jabbed a sausage-like finger toward the biker, whose face was a mask of hope and dread. This piece of shit doesn't get special treatment. This isn't a customer. This is a goddamn problem walking through my door. The biker's jaw clenched, the insult landing like a punch to the gut. He opened his mouth to speak, but Donovan cut him off with a vicious sneer. Oh, save it. I know your type. All leather and ink and respect me or else. You walk in here looking to intimidate people, thinking your little costume should make everyone drop what they're doing for you. Not in my garage, not on my watch, not for some goddamn biker trash. A low murmur went through the other mechanics. A few of them smirked, enjoying the show. Others looked down, too cowardly to meet anyone's eyes. Maya's voice cut through the tension, sharp and cold. He's not trash. He's a father trying to get to his sick daughter at the hospital. He's not asking for special treatment. He's asking for 5 minutes of basic human decency. Donovan spun on her, his eyes narrowed to slits, his lip curled back from his teeth. And you think you're the one to give it? You think you know better than me? You're a rookie, Sanchez. A little girl playing in a man's world. You do what you're told. That's the only reason you still have a job here, and you're gonna throw it all away for him? The biker stepped forward, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. You don't talk to her like that. Donovan's head snapped toward him, his face contorting with rage. Or what, huh? You gonna start something? You and your little gang? You people are all the same? All tough until someone calls your bluff. You think that patch on your back means something in here? It means you're a menace, a parasite, a thug. Each word was a calculated blow, designed to provoke, to humiliate. The biker's fists clenched at his sides, his whole body vibrating with the effort it took not to retaliate. He knew that's what Donovan wanted. One wrong move, and he'd be the aggressor, the monster they all saw him as. For his daughter, he held it back. Maya's own anger burned hotter, the insults feeling as if they were directed at her. She took another step, placing herself slightly between the two men. "That's enough," she said, her voice shaking with a fury she could no longer contain. "You don't know a thing about him. You don't get to stand here and tear him down because you're too scared and small-minded to see past a leather jacket." Donovan got right in her face, so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. His voice dropped to a hiss, loaded with every ounce of his prejudice. "You watch your mouth. You think defending him makes you some kind of hero? It makes you a fool. You're nothing in this shop, Sanchez. Just a little spick who should be grateful we let you clean the toilets. You will never be anything more." The garage froze. The silence was absolute, suffocating. Every eye was locked on them. Someone coughed nervously. Maya felt the blood drain from her face, her stomach twisting into a knot. He had gone there. He had unsheathed the ugliest blade he had. But she would not bleed for him. Her spine turned to steel. Her voice came back, steady, defiant, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "I earned my place here. With every bolt I've turned, every engine I've rebuilt, every goddamn hour of overtime I've put in. And I am not going to let you tell me I don't belong because I'm a woman or because my last name is Sanchez. You don't get to decide my worth. Not you, not ever." Donovan's face went purple. "You want to talk about worth? Fine. As of this second, you're worth nothing to me. Pack your shit. You're fired. Get the hell out of my shop." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of her lungs. But she didn't crumble. She didn't cry or beg. She just stared at him, her eyes locking with his, refusing to give him the satisfaction of breaking her. The biker's voice cut in, raw and desperate. "Don't do this to her. She did nothing wrong. She was the only one here with any goddamn heart. Fire me, ban me, but don't punish her for doing the right thing." Donovan laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "I don't owe you a damn thing, biker. You brought this on her. You walked in here and contaminated my shop. Now get out, both of you, before I call the cops and have you both thrown out for trespassing." The biker's jaw was a knot of granite, his body trembling, but he held his ground. He looked at Donovan with cold, hard clarity. "You don't see people," he said, his voice flat. "You just see targets for your own hate." "Spare me the Hallmark card bullshit," Donovan sneered, turning his back on them and storming toward his office. The other mechanics just stood there, statues of inaction. Their fear of Donovan was stronger than any loyalty, any sense of justice. Maya's voice followed him, quiet but unbreakable. "You're wrong," she said, not just to him, but to the whole silent, watching room. "You're wrong about him. You're wrong about me. And you're wrong about everything. And one day, you're going to regret this." Donovan paused at his office door and turned, a final, parting shot on his lips. "Get out, Sanchez. You and your pet project. You're finished in this city. I'll make sure you never turn a wrench professionally again." Maya held his hateful gaze for one last second. The sting was real, the fear was real, but underneath it, something colder and stronger was taking root. It was the certainty of her choice. She turned away from him, wiping her hands on her coveralls, her voice low but clear. "I can live with losing this job. I couldn't live with being the kind of person who would have let him leave alone." The biker looked at her, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. Gratitude, guilt, awe. She just gave him a single, small shake of her head. He reached out and briefly gripped her shoulder, a silent, powerful gesture of solidarity. The garage was still frozen. No one spoke. No one moved to defend her. No one offered a word of sympathy. The moment was over. She had been cast out. The biker had been branded. And the machine of Apex Automotive, after a brief, violent shudder, returned to its grimy, rusted rhythm, as if she had never been there at all. But for Maya, and for the man whose name she still didn't know, it wasn't over. It was the beginning of everything. The biker stood there for a moment after Donovan had slammed his office door, the engine of the Harley still rumbling a low, defiant thunder in the sudden quiet. His hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white, but the fight had been drained out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy shame. His eyes found Maya, who was slowly, methodically beginning to gather the few personal tools from her workbench. "I'm sorry," he said, the words sounding like they were being dragged over broken glass. "I never should have. I didn't mean for any of this. To cost you your job." His voice cracked, thick with a guilt that was suffocating. Maya paused, her back still to him, her shoulders were rigid, but when she finally turned, her expression wasn't angry or resentful. It was weary, but it was clear. "Don't be," she said, her voice steady. "This wasn't your fault. You came in here needing help. What happened after that? That's on him. It's on all of them, not you." His jaw worked, his gaze dropping to the greasy concrete floor. "But I brought it to you. I walked in, and they saw the jacket, the patch, and they made up their minds. And then you stepped in front of me." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "I've been dealing with that shit my whole life. But you shouldn't have to." Maya let the silence hang between them, letting his words settle. "I've been dealing with my own version of it my whole life, too," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "I knew what I was doing. I knew there would be a price. Maybe I didn't think it would be this exactly, but I knew. And I would do it again. Because that's how I was raised. You don't turn your back. You just don't." He looked at her then. Truly looked at her, as if trying to understand the source of her strength. He had expected her to be furious, to be crying, to regret her decision. Instead, he found a conviction that seemed forged in fire. His throat felt tight. "You remind me of my daughter," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Lily. She's only 8, but she's got the heart of a lion. Stubborn as hell, always standing up for the other kids, even if it gets her in trouble." He paused, the pain flickering across his face. "She's lying in a hospital bed, and the only thing I could think about was getting to her. When they all looked at me like I was a piece of garbage for a second, I thought I had failed her already. And then you—" He couldn't finish the sentence, swallowing hard against the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Maya's heart ached with a sharp, empathetic pain. She thought of her own father, his quiet dignity in the face of his disability. She thought of her mother, working until she was bone-tired without a word of complaint. She thought of every time she'd been made to feel small, and how easy it would have been to start believing it. She met his eyes. "You're not garbage," she said quietly. "You're a father who loves his daughter. That's all I saw. That's all that mattered." For a second, the big, intimidating biker looked like he might break. He had been called 1,000 names in his life. Thug, monster, criminal. He couldn't remember the last time someone had simply seen the man underneath. His voice was broken when he finally spoke. "Thank you." Maya shook her head, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. "Don't thank me. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Because if my dad was lying in a hospital bed, I would hope to God someone would do the same for me. He nodded slowly, the words seeming to land somewhere deep inside him. He looked at her with a raw respect that transcended their surroundings. "You've got more guts than this entire garage combined," he said. "They'll never say it, but they know it." A lump formed in Maya's throat. She glanced around the shop. The mechanics were back to work, pretending not to watch them. Kim was filing her nails. No one met her eye. They would remember her as the fool who got fired. But standing here, with this stranger looking at her like she was a warrior, it was enough. She took a slow breath, the weight of the day settling on her, but not crushing her. "I can live with losing the job," she repeated, more to herself this time. "But I couldn't live with becoming one of them. I'd rather carry the weight of being fired than the weight of being a coward." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words wash over him. When he opened them again, the panic was gone, replaced by a cold, clear focus. He held out his hand, the leather of his glove worn smooth, the knuckles scarred. She looked at it, then at him, and took it without hesitation. The handshake was firm, brief, but it was a contract. "You're a good person," he said, his voice thick with a reverence that startled her. "Don't ever let assholes like them make you forget that." She held his gaze, her grip solid, her own voice finding its strength. "And you're not the monster they see. Don't you let them make you forget that either." They stood like that for a beat longer, two outcasts bound by a moment of shared humanity. When they let go, something in the room had irrevocably shifted. He turned toward the door, then paused and looked back at her. "I'm gonna make it," he said, his voice low and grateful. "Because of you, I'll get to her in time." Maya just nodded once. "Go," she said. "She needs her dad." With that, he was gone, pushing through the doors into the biting Cleveland wind. The roar of his Harley echoed down Forge Avenue, a sound of freedom and fury, until it was swallowed by the city. Maya stood alone in the silence, her hands still smelling of oil and steel, her heart steady in the quiet, certain knowledge that she had chosen her humanity over her security. And for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel small. She felt powerful. Maya walked home through the early twilight, the wind a physical force that pushed against her, trying to steal the breath from her lungs. The sky was a bruised purple, and the streetlights of her neighborhood flickered on, casting a sickly orange glow on the icy sidewalks. Her duffel bag, containing the few tools she owned, felt like it was filled with lead. She let herself into the small apartment, the familiar smell of her mother's cooking doing little to soothe the coiled knot of dread in her stomach. She dropped her bag by the door. The thud echoed the finality of the day. How was she going to tell them? How was she going to explain that she had thrown away the one steady paycheck they had, all for a stranger? She sat on the edge of the worn-out couch, her head in her hands, and let the exhaustion roll over her in a suffocating wave. She could still hear Donovan's hateful words, see the smirks on the faces of her co-workers. And yet, underneath the shame and the fear, a small, defiant ember of pride began to glow. She hadn't backed down. She hadn't broken. She had chosen. The night was a restless blur. By morning, a grim resolve had settled in. She would go back. Not to beg, not to fight, but to collect the rest of her tools from her locker. She deserved that much. A clean break. She took the bus back to Forge Avenue, the city outside the grimy window a landscape of gray and steel. The garage looked exactly the same, a monument to the misery she had just escaped. As she approached the front door, her steps slowed. This was it. The final goodbye. But when she reached the entrance, she froze. Parked at the curb, where the Harley had been just the day before, sat a gleaming black town car, the kind that looked alien in this part of the city. A man in a dark suit stood beside it, his posture rigid. As she got closer, he looked directly at her and spoke, his voice polite but firm. "Ms. Sanchez?" Her heart leaped into her throat. "Yes?" "Mr. Thorne will see you now," he said, opening the rear door of the car. Her mind raced. Thorne? She didn't know anyone named Thorne. This had to be a mistake, or worse, a trap, some new, elaborate humiliation orchestrated by Donovan. "I think you have the wrong person," she said, taking a step back. "Maya Sanchez, aged 22, fired yesterday from Apex Automotive for insubordination," the driver recited, his tone unchanging. "There is no mistake. Please, get in the car." 1,000 alarm bells were screaming in her head, but something in his professional demeanor, something in the sheer strangeness of it all, made her comply. She slid into the plush leather interior. The door closed with a silent, heavy thud, sealing her off from the world she knew. The car pulled away from the curb, not toward her home, but toward the towering skyscrapers of downtown Cleveland. The ride was silent and agonizingly long. They pulled up in front of a massive glass and steel tower, a building that scraped the clouds. The driver led her through a marble lobby, past a security desk, and into a private elevator that shot upwards with breathtaking speed. The doors opened directly into a sprawling corner office. The entire city of Cleveland spread out below them, a miniature world viewed from the heavens. At a vast mahogany desk sat a man in a perfectly tailored suit. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of calm, lethal power. He looked up as she entered, his eyes analytical and intelligent. "Ms. Sanchez," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'm Marcus Thorne. Thank you for coming." Before she could respond, a side door opened, and the biker from yesterday walked in. He was out of his leather, dressed in simple jeans and a dark Henley that stretched across his broad chest. The tattoos on his arms and neck were even more vivid without the jacket. He looked cleaner, less wild, but the intensity in his eyes was unchanged. He met her gaze and gave her a slow, deliberate nod. Maya's head was spinning. She looked from the biker to the CEO, trying to make the pieces fit. I don't understand," she stammered. Marcus Thorne gestured to a chair. "Please, sit." He waited until she had, then leaned forward, his hands clasped on the desk. "Yesterday, my brother walked into one of my garages. He was treated like a piece of garbage by men who work for me. They judged him, they mocked him, and they turned him away when he was in the middle of the worst crisis of his life." He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. "Everyone, that is, except you." The word hit her like a physical shock. Brother. This polished, powerful CEO was the brother of the biker she had helped. She stared at the biker, whose name she still didn't know, and he just shrugged, a faint, wry smile on his lips. "My name's Jax," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Jax Ryder?" Marcus continued, his tone hardening. "Jax and I built this company together, from a one-bay garage in a bad neighborhood. We had nothing but grease under our nails and a code. The code was simple. You help people. You don't judge. You do the right thing, always. I may wear a suit now and he may still wear leather, but that code is the foundation of everything I own." His eyes turned to ice. "And yesterday, your manager, Frank Donovan, took a piss all over it." Maya's breath caught in her throat. "You didn't just help a stranger, Mrs. Sanchez," Marcus said, his voice quiet but intense. "You gave my brother the chance to be with his daughter when she woke up from surgery. You gave my niece her father. You upheld the very code this company was founded on, while my own manager spat on it. You did that, even when it cost you everything." Jax finally spoke, his voice filled with a rough gratitude. "When everyone else saw a thug, you saw a father. People don't do that. Not for guys who look like me. But you did. You didn't even hesitate." The silence in the room was thick with unspoken history, with a bond that went deeper than blood. "As of 7 a.m. this morning, Frank Donovan is no longer employed by this company," Marcus said bluntly. "Prejudice and cruelty have no place here, not on my watch." He slid a thick folder across the desk toward her. "I've reviewed your file. Your work is exemplary. You're one of the best mechanics in our entire Midwest division. Donovan has been burying your performance reviews for years." He tapped the folder. "This is not a job offer, Ms. Sanchez. It's an apology, and it's a correction. We are offering you the position of shop manager at the Forge Avenue location. Full authority, top-tier salary and benefits, and a mandate to burn the old culture to the ground and rebuild it into something that reflects the code we started with." Maya stared at the folder, her mind unable to process the words. Manager. Her own shop. The dream she thought had just been brutally murdered was being handed to her on a silver platter. Her voice was a choked whisper. I don't know what to say." Jax stepped forward, his presence filling the space beside her. "Say yes," he said, his voice rough but certain. "Say yes because you earned it. Say yes because yesterday you were the only person in that whole damn city who acted like a human being." She looked from Jax's intense gaze to Marcus's steady one. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, a wild drum of terror and elation. She reached out a trembling hand and placed it on the folder. She didn't need to open it. Marcus Thorne extended his hand across the desk. His grip was like steel. "Welcome to the front office, Ms. Sanchez." She took his hand, her own grip surprisingly firm. And in that handshake, in that opulent office high above the city, Maya Sanchez felt the world shift on its axis. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the storm. Donovan did not go quietly into the night. A man like him, whose entire identity was wrapped up in the petty tyranny of his position, couldn't accept being dethroned. He took his firing not as a consequence, but as a declaration of war. The bitterness festered, turning into a black, obsessive rage. From the sad, beer-soaked confines of his apartment, he began to plot his revenge. It started small, whispers to old contacts in the supply chain, a quiet word to a friendly inspector. He painted Maya as a reckless, inexperienced kid who was in over her head, a diversity hire promoted for appearances, not for skill. He was a master of the backhanded compliment, the well-placed seed of doubt. "She's a sweet girl," he'd say, "but she just doesn't have the experience to run a high-volume shop. It's dangerous." And slowly, insidiously, the poison began to work. Inside Apex Automotive, the atmosphere soured. The initial grudging respect the mechanics had shown Maya after Donovan's firing curdled into a sullen, passive-aggressive resistance. Tools would go missing from her bay. A work order she'd filled out would mysteriously vanish from the system. They'd follow her direct orders, but with a slowness and carelessness that bordered on sabotage. Customers started coming back with complaints. A man whose car she had personally serviced a week prior returned, furious, claiming his brakes felt mushy. When she inspected the vehicle, she found the brake line had been expertly nicked, a tiny, almost invisible cut that would cause a slow, dangerous leak over time. It was a wound that could only have been inflicted by a professional. She knew, with a sickening certainty, that one of her own mechanics had done it. But she couldn't prove a thing. One evening, long after her resentful crew had clocked out, she was alone in the silent garage, poring over inventory sheets that didn't add up, the weight of the world on her shoulders. She heard the familiar rumble of a Harley and looked up to see Jax leaning against the doorframe, his silhouette framed by the fading light. He'd been stopping by every few days, a silent, watchful guardian. "You look like you're carrying a truck on your back," he said, his voice a low gravel. Maya ran a hand through her hair, frustration and exhaustion etched on her face. I feel like it, she admitted. It's like I'm trying to build a house in the middle of a swamp. Every time I lay a foundation, the ground gives way. The numbers are off. The suppliers are suddenly back-ordered, and my own guys are looking at me like I'm the enemy. Donovan? He's not done. I can feel him, like a ghost, poisoning everything he used to touch. Jax's jaw tightened, a muscle flexing in his cheek. Then we stop fighting his ghost, he said flatly. We drag the bastard himself into the light. The next few days were a blur of escalating tension. A false, anonymous tip was sent to OSHA, triggering a surprise inspection that shut them down for half a day. A series of scathing one-star reviews appeared online, all posted within hours of each other, all using similar venomous language about the incompetent new female manager. The whispers among the mechanics grew louder. See? We told you she couldn't handle it. Place is going to hell. Maya felt like she was drowning. She worked harder, stayed later, double-checking every bolt, every invoice, every single detail herself. But it wasn't enough to fight an enemy she couldn't see. Donovan was a cancer, and he was killing her dream from the outside in. She was close to breaking, the thought of failure a bitter taste in her mouth. That night, Jax called her. His voice was different. It was sharp, cold, and utterly devoid of doubt. Be at the shop at 9 a.m. tomorrow, he said, and don't be late. Jax, what's going on? She asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. Just trust me, he said, and hung up. The next morning, Forge Avenue woke to the sound of thunder. It wasn't a storm. It was the synchronized roar of nearly 200 motorcycles. They rolled in, one by one, then by the dozen, a river of chrome and steel that flooded the street. Members of the Iron Wraiths, joined by other clubs from across the state, a formidable army of leather and loyalty. They parked in perfect formation, blocking the entire street, their engines idling in a deep, intimidating chorus that shook the very windows of Apex Automotive. People poured out of the nearby warehouses and storefronts, their phones out, recording in stunned silence. This wasn't a joyride. This was a show of force. Maya stepped out of the garage, her heart pounding against her ribs. She saw Jax at the head of the formation sitting on his Road King. He cut his engine, swung his leg over the bike, and stood, every inch the president of his club. His face was a mask of cold, hard fury. What is all this? She whispered as he approached. This, he said, his voice carrying over the rumble of the engines, is how we fight back. He turned to face the growing crowd and the dozens of phones now streaming live. He held up a thick manila folder. Frank Donovan's lies end today, he bellowed. I have proof. I have recordings of him bribing suppliers to cut this shop off. I have sworn statements from former employees he terrorized. I have a witness, one of his own cronies from inside, who is ready to testify that Donovan paid him to sabotage vehicles serviced by Ms. Sanchez. He pointed a finger at a nervous-looking mechanic cowering near the garage entrance, who immediately went pale. A collective gasp went through the crowd. The story had just turned from corporate backstabbing to criminal conspiracy. He tried to ruin her. Jax's voice was a roar of righteous fury. He tried to destroy this business because his fragile ego couldn't handle being replaced by a strong, competent woman. He put lives at risk to settle a score. Jax turned his fiery gaze back to Maya, his voice softening just enough for her to hear. You don't fight lies with silence, he said, his eyes locking with hers. You fight them with a truth so loud it can't be ignored. The truth is, this woman has more integrity in her little finger than that coward has in his entire body. She stood up for a stranger when no one else would. She deserves this city's respect, not its suspicion. And as long as the Iron Wraiths draw breath, she will never, ever stand alone again. As if on cue, the 200 bikers behind him revved their engines in unison, a deafening, explosive roar that echoed off the brick buildings, a primal scream of solidarity, The crowd erupted in cheers. Across town, Donovan was watching a live stream on his laptop, his face turning from red to a sickly gray. His phone began to ring, but he just stared at the screen in disbelief as his carefully constructed web of lies was publicly incinerated. "No," he muttered, his hands shaking. "No, no, no!" A hard, relentless knock rattled his apartment door. "Cleveland PD!" a voice shouted. "Open up!" Donovan scrambled back from the door, his eyes wide with panic. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by the splintering crack of wood as the door was forced open. Back on Forge Avenue, amid the thunder of engines and the cheers of the crowd, Maya stood beside Jax, tears streaming unchecked down her face. She looked at the army of men who had come to stand with her, at the stranger who had become her staunchest ally, and felt the last of her fear burn away, replaced by a strength she never knew she possessed. The ground beneath her feet was solid again. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was fighting back. And this time she had an army at her back. The roar on Forge Avenue was more than just noise. It was a verdict being delivered by 200 engines. It was a raw, primal declaration that the truth had arrived, and it was loud, and it was angry. The sea of bystanders, their phones held high like torches, became a de facto jury, broadcasting the trial of Frank Donovan across the city in real time. Hashtags were already trending. Court stand with Sanchez, Humboch, Forge Ave Justice. At the epicenter of it all, Maya stood, grease still smudged on her cheek like war paint, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. Jax held the folder aloft, a weapon forged from paper and proof. "This is the evidence," he yelled, shaking it for the cameras. "Every text, every recorded call, every dirty deal Donovan made to frame her and ruin this shop. It all leads back to him." He pointed a thick, tattooed finger towards the garage. He thought he could get away with it because he thought nobody would fight for her. He thought you'd all believe his lies because it's easier to tear down a woman, a minority, who dares to take a position of power. The words hit the crowd like a shockwave. On the sidewalk, a customer who had complained just days before had the decency to look ashamed, his eyes dropping to his shoes. The truth, when it's this raw and undeniable, has a way of forcing introspection. Jax's voice cracked with emotion as he continued. "This woman, she put her job, her entire future on the line for me. A man she didn't know. A man all of you." He swept his arm to indicate the garage. "Judged and dismissed in a heartbeat. She saw a father, terrified for his little girl. And because of her courage, I got to hold my daughter's hand when she woke up. I got to tell her I loved her." He paused, his voice dropping, becoming thick and raw. "You tell me what that's worth. You put a price on that." Maya swallowed against the tight knot in her throat, the tears finally winning. But she didn't try to hide them. She stood tall, letting them fall. Suddenly, a single police cruiser rolled quietly through the parted sea of motorcycles, its lights flashing silently. The crowd murmured, phones swinging to capture the new development. 2 officers got out. They didn't approach Jax or the bikers. They walked with grim purpose straight into the garage, heading for the back offices. A moment later they emerged, with Frank Donovan held firmly between them, his hands cuffed behind his back. Donovan, his face a mask of purple rage and disbelief, started screaming. "It's a setup! She's lying! They're all lying! You can't do this!" But his protests were drowned out by the eruption from the crowd. A chorus of jeers and shouts of "liar" and "racist" followed him as he was shoved, still struggling, into the back of the cruiser. Maya watched, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She had hoped for justice, but she had never imagined it would be so swift, so public, so absolute. She felt the ground solidifying under her feet, the swamp of lies and sabotage draining away, leaving behind firm, unshakable ground. Jax stepped closer, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was a low rumble, meant only for her. "It's over," he said. "He can't hurt you anymore." She nodded, unable to speak, her chest swelling with a feeling so immense it had no name. It was relief. It was vindication. It was a profound, bone-deep gratitude. But it was heavier than that, too, because victory doesn't erase the wounds of the battle. One by one, the bikers began to shut off their engines, the sudden silence almost more shocking than the noise had been. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause, the sound filling the void. A local news reporter pushed her way through the throng, shoving a microphone in Maya's face. "Ms. Sanchez, how does it feel to have your name cleared in front of the entire city?" Maya blinked into the camera lens, the tears still wet on her cheeks. She found her voice, and it was soft, but it was clear and steady. "It was never just about my name," she said, the words coming straight from her soul. "It's about doing the right thing, especially when it's the hardest thing. It's about seeing the human being in front of you, not the label. That's all that ever matters." Her words rippled through the crowd, captured on 100 devices, destined to become the soundbite that would define the story. In that moment, Maya realized she wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She had become a symbol. The bikers started to disperse, their engines rumbling back to life in a staggered, rolling thunder. The street began to clear. Jax lingered, his eyes on her, the hard fury on his face replaced by something softer. "You'll be okay now," he said. "More than okay. They'll respect you now. Not because they were told to, but because you commanded it." "Thank you, Jax," she whispered, her throat tight. "For everything." He shook his head. "You stood up first. I just made sure the world was watching." With a final nod, he mounted his bike and rode off, his taillight disappearing into the fabric of the city. The crowd thinned, the reporters packed up their cameras, and the street slowly returned to normal. When the last of the noise had faded, Maya stood alone on the sidewalk in front of her garage. The city hummed around her, but for the first time, she felt its rhythm in her own heart. She had lost a job, only to gain a calling. She had been silenced, only to find a voice that could command an army. As she looked down the long, gritty expanse of Forge Avenue, she knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't the end of her story. It was the first page of a new chapter. The next morning, Apex Automotive was a different place. The air itself felt charged, scrubbed clean of the years of toxic masculinity and resentment. The mechanics, the ones Donovan hadn't implicated in his schemes, moved with a quiet, cautious deference. Their usual swagger was gone, replaced by a wary respect. They met Maya's eyes now, and when she gave an order, they followed it without question or comment. She stood by her new manager's desk in the small, glass-walled office, the keys feeling heavy and foreign in her hand. The silence was broken by the deep, familiar rumble of a Harley. Jax pushed through the front doors, but he wasn't alone. He was flanked by two older bikers, men whose faces were etched with the kind of wisdom that only comes from decades on the road. Their patches were faded, their leather worn like a second skin. They moved with a quiet gravity that commanded the attention of the entire shop. The few customers present fell silent, their eyes wide. The mechanics froze. Jax walked the length of the garage, his boots echoing on the concrete, and stopped in front of her office. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were for her, but the entire room held its breath to listen. "Came to say thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Properly." Maya's throat was tight. "Jax, you don't have to—" He held up a hand, cutting her off. "Yes, I do," he said, his gaze unwavering. "What you did for me, for my Lily, I'll carry that with me until the day I die. You gave me back my daughter. There's no way to repay a debt like that. But I can stand here today and make damn sure you know it mattered. That you mattered." His words, spoken with such raw, simple sincerity, landed with more force than any threat or insult ever could. He turned his head slightly, his voice hardening as he addressed the silent, watching mechanics. "She stood alone in this place when every single one of you turned your backs. You saw a patch, and you wrote me off. She saw a father, and she risked everything. That makes her more of a man than any of you will ever be. And from this day forward, you will show her the respect she has earned." The weight of his words was immense, an indictment and a command all in one. Shame flickered across the faces of the men who had once mocked her. Jax turned back to her, his expression softening. "You told me you were just trying to be human. Well, maybe that's the whole point. Maybe that's what a real hero is." A single tear escaped and traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Her voice, when she found it, was steady. "I just did what I thought was right. And that's why you'll never have to stand alone again," he said. "Not as long as we ride." Just then, Marcus Thorne emerged from the back, his expensive suit looking out of place but his presence undeniable. He stood beside Jax, a portrait of two worlds united. "What my brother says is true," he announced, his CEO's voice ringing with authority. "This garage failed. It failed him, it failed Ms. Sanchez, and it failed the principles this company was built on. That failure ends today." He looked directly at Maya. "You didn't just save a family, Ms. Sanchez. You saved the soul of this company. You reminded me what we're supposed to be about." He then addressed the entire shop. "This is your new manager. Her word is law. Her vision is our future. If any of you have a problem with that, the door is right there. Don't let it hit you on the way out." No one moved. No one spoke. The New World Order had been established. Months passed. The garage on Forge Avenue was transformed. The name on the sign now read Apex and Ryder Community Garage. Half of the new mechanics Maya hired were women, young apprentices from the neighborhood whom she was personally mentoring. On Saturdays, they hosted a free workshop for local kids, teaching them basic auto repair, giving them skills and a safe place to be. The Iron Wraiths were a constant presence, not as a threat, but as partners. They helped with the youth program, sponsored events, and their patronage ensured the garage was always busy. The place was no longer just a business. It had become the heart of the community. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the city, Maya was under the hood of a car, showing a teenage girl how to change a spark plug. The girl's face was smudged with grease, her eyes bright with concentration and pride. Jax leaned against the doorframe, watching them, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Maya met his eyes over the engine block and smiled back. She had walked into this place broken and invisible. She had been called worthless, but she had refused to believe it. By choosing her own humanity, by refusing to back down, she hadn't just gotten her job back. She had built a legacy. She had taken a place of darkness and flooded it with light. What did you take away from Maya's story today? What does it mean to you to stand up when everyone else stays seated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your stories inspire me every day. Please hit that like button and subscribe so we can continue to share stories that matter. Because as Maya Sanchez proved, sometimes the person with the dirtiest hands has the cleanest soul. Now go out there and don't be afraid to get your hands dirty doing the right thing.